Avon Resources Limited is a gold exploration company with significant projects in British Columbia and the Yukon, trading on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol ABN, and the OTCQB, symbol ABNAF. Surrounded by world-class gold deposits and mines, Avon's 23,000 hectares Forest Kerr Gold Project is located in the heart of the Golden Triangle in northwestern BC. For more information, visit us at avonresources.com.
You're listening to HowStreet.com radio, available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Welcome to HowStreet.com radio, the online source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Stewart Muir, Executive Director of the ResourceWorks Society. His website, resourceworks.com. You can find him on Twitter at SJMuir. Welcome back to the show, Stewart.
Thank you, Jim.
We've had both a federal and provincial BC budget. Anything in there for the natural resource industry?
Well, it's the focus we've seen from the coverage on the federal budget has been mainly on the spending side, because there are some ambitious goals. I think there's been a kind of sense of relief that there's not a lot of tax measures that make life more difficult during the recovery period for individuals, which is good news, although there is the mystery of where does the money come from to pay for all of these enormous social expenditures that will inevitably have to be paid for in real money at some point. So that's a question for down the road. But for now, on the industrial side, I think actually if you look into the federal budget 2021, there's actually some interesting stuff that at ResourceWorks we've analyzed. We found that renewal of national trade corridors so that rural, remote communities can continue to get their resource products to market. That's very, very important. If you're going to have the kind of economy we have in Canada, you've got to pay attention to the details like this. So there's a couple of $1 billion towards what they call the National Trade Corridors Fund, and this could attract some further private investments in order to spur investments in things like roads and rail and shipping routes, which we need to get things moving. In terms of the general drift on clean fuels, on recognizing that okay, if we're gonna use these fuels, we're putting gasoline in the car, we need to work on how we reduce its greenhouse gas footprint. But how do you do that? So there's a new Clean Fuels Fund that we're pleased to see that supports the production and distribution of lower carbon, including zero emission fuels, hydrogen, biomass. We think that there needs to be a little more attention to the details on hydrogen. They love to talk about green hydrogen, which is mainly a speculative thing. There is physical capability to create green hydrogen. That is to say, hydrogen not made with fossil fuels, because natural gas and coal are how you generally make hydrogen today, and it costs about 3 times more to make it with these emerging green technologies. So for a long period of time, so-called blue hydrogen, which is made from natural gas, is probably the best source of zero carbon hydrogen, because you can sequester the carbon in the manufacturing of the hydrogen when you use natural gas. Unfortunately, I think there's kind of a blinkered view in Ottawa on that. They're a little more idealistic, assuming that these so far unproven technologies will suddenly make it possible to create limitless amounts of green hydrogen for next to nothing. That's really a fantasy right now. So if you're dwelling in reality, as I try to do, you need to be talking about green hydrogen. So I think for next year, their budget needs to be looking more at that. But it's a good step to see that there is, a focus on the hydrogen strategy that's been developed. So that's a good thing. So if you go into the details, the federal budget isn't bad. If you turn to the British Columbia budget, one thing we're seeing is that there's a significant forecast increase in natural gas revenues. That's because of prices being higher. Will this last? It's hard to say. There may be some signs of higher land auctions in natural gas country that could result, I believe, in more drilling, and that's going to be needed as we start to see LNG Canada near. I mean, it's still years away, a lot of work to be done to finish that massive project at Kitimat, but you can't have an LNG plant on the coast without gas coming to feed it, and you can't have gas without drilling holes or wells to produce that gas. So I think, there's some signs there that the provincial government is committed on the policy front to doing what it needs to do. I thought it was really interesting. We've seen forestry in the news quite a lot lately in BC, especially on the coast, Jim, and recognition in the budget that having a healthy forest industry is how First Nations reconciliation is going to be possible. Over the next 3 years, the Indigenous Rights and Reconciliation Ministry is getting pretty much all the money it has to do its reconciliation agreements with First Nations in BC coming from forest revenues, from stumpage paid. That's right. And at the same time, you have some voices, environmental groups, that are saying we should shut down forestry, because if they're saying, they might say, well, no, we just want to shut down old growth forestry. But the problem in BC is that old growth and second growth, or third growth even, are mixed together. You right now can't have forest products manufacturing, be that pulp and paper, be that mills producing boards or specialty products. You just couldn't have that without a complement of old growth in it. And so the fact that we can have reconciliation for First Nations funded through forest activity means there's a direct connection towards attaining the social goals that First Nations have tied to the diversified forestry basket. So really, really important stuff there.
Stewart, you found something ironic here about the forestry protests and protesters. Weren't they basically told to get off native land because they were blocking legitimate economic things that needed to be done, and people couldn't get in and out of their homes because of the protesters?
Yeah, I think there was, a small group of protesters have been blocking roads so that a company that has the rights and approvals to harvest in that area close to Victoria, southern Vancouver Island, so they can't get in there. And that's been going on for months. Recently, a BC judge said, that's wrong. You will have to get out of the way. You have no right to be there. The company does have the legal right to harvest there. And actually, the judgment is quite fascinating, because concerns about safety, certainly during COVID, I mean, encouraging folks to flock into the woods and band together and try to stop things is not what you would advise during a pandemic, but it's what these protest groups are advising their followers to do. So as we see these numbers spike, you have to wonder, what are the contributing factors to it? Having weekend protests where hundreds or thousands of people are flocking to the woods to do this, as they've been doing in the last few weeks, concerns me, not just a little. Nevertheless, I'm not the only one noticing this. The Premier of British Columbia, John Horgan, he stood up recently and he said, look, we as a government are not going to be moved. We've worked with our stakeholders and communities on what needs to be done. We're making some improvements in forest practices that we think need to be done, so that's happening. But if you're going to use these protests to, I think he criticized them for the use of GoFundMes to raise hundreds of thousands of dollars to keep these protests going. He was very critical of that, unusually critical. So I think it shows you that there is actually a common sense foundation of thinking in government, which leaves me feeling quite happy that we have leadership that's able to recognize what's needed, because, the provincial budget never gets smaller. It only ever gets bigger. It's over $50 billion a year, but every dollar has to come from somewhere. And we have only so many ways to get it. Forestry alone supplies as much money as comes to the government from BC Hydro and the BC Lotteries organization. That's how much goes in to pay for, the things we use in everyday life, hospitals. Well, that's not everyday life, is it, for most people, but, roads and schools, and other things that aren't so everyday. So there's people who are paying attention to this stuff, fortunately, Jim.
We'll have more with Stewart Muir right after this.
Engineer Gold Mines is focused on the exploration and development of the historic high-grade Engineer Gold Mine situated 32 kilometers southwest of Atlan, British Columbia. Engineer Gold Mines is fully permitted for surface and underground exploration, with the drill program now underway. Engineer Gold Mines Limited trades on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol EAU. For more information, please visit us at engineergoldmines.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Stewart Muir. Stewart, a parliamentary committee was talking minerals the other day. What's the story there?
Well, that's right. The subcommittee on human rights of the Parliament of Canada's Foreign Affairs Committee met and invited ResourceWorks to be among presenters. So Margareta Dovgal, our Director of Research, appeared on Zoom in front of them. And the subject was some pressure to create regulations for Canadian mining companies that operate abroad, because the fact is there have been over the years in international mining incidents where mining companies don't come out looking too good. And some of those companies over time have been Canadian ones. And I'm talking about environmental issues and rights issues. So this parliamentary committee is pursuing a new layer of oversight that would mean that the mining industry is facing yet another layer of regulation and scrutiny, which is on top of an enormous amount of such things that already exist. So as you might imagine, the industry isn't too thrilled with that, but there were a few people. I watched this session online. It's at our website at resourceworks.com, by the way. And, there seemed to be, on the part of the MPs on the committee, at least some of them, a real determination to try to make it difficult or impossible for Canadian mining companies to do anything anywhere on the face of the planet. Yet at the same time, here you have, say, China. Well, this is really specifically China, that is, in the case of countries in South America and Africa, they are imposing their will on local governments in a way that no Canadian company would ever do or think of trying to do, seeking to have control of whole governments, using slave labor imported from China to do work in those countries that should be done not by slaves and certainly not by imported workers. But this is happening, and those same MPs who are seeking to create this process are turning a blind eye to that. So I think that's got a lot of people furious, that there's this double standard. Here we are talking about a clean energy revolution that is going to depend on child labor from Congo to develop the rare earth minerals needed to have that clean energy future. And China's doing that, but Canadian companies cannot be part of bringing higher standards to these parts of the world because we have Canadian legislators who want to stop that from happening. I think it just it does disturb some people when they think of the fairness, and also just the sheer fact that Canada in 2021, I mean, you can't say that the past was always perfect, but one thing Canada does very, very well is improve over time and be accountable. And that's why we have got, with probably one or two other countries, Canada is definitely one of the top nations in the world in terms of mining practices and standards and following them. So what we need out there is more Canadian mining, not less. And we need parliamentarians who support that.
We'll have more with Stewart Muir right after this.
Media recognition from Bloomberg, Reuters, recycling trade publications, patented process for 100% recovery of critical metals, including cobalt, lithium, nickel, manganese, aluminum. American Manganese is focused on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. American Manganese trades on the TSX Venture, AMY, the US, AMYZF, and Frankfurt 2AM. For more information, visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
Don't miss out. Stay informed. Receive the HowStreet.com weekly recap with thought-provoking podcasts, radio, and articles delivered to your inbox. Sign up for the HowStreet.com weekly recap on our homepage at HowStreet.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Stewart Muir. Stewart, what's the latest on the climate change front and the development of natural resources? Do we have countries that are dead set against doing anything and just continuing their old ways?
Yeah, well, there's almost like two narratives right now, Jim. One is, okay, the world is rapidly changing and getting off fossil fuels, and this is something that everyone else should follow. We should stop using natural gas. I was looking for these You've got trends right now in India and China building a massive number of coal-fired plants to develop electricity, and it's quite surprising, really. In China, you have probably hundreds of new coal plants being built. If you look at the general trend, this week we had the latest report from the International Energy Agency, and one of the things they found is that coal demand alone is going to increase by 60% more than all renewables combined. That's the forecast for the future. So this is not what we're hearing from the kind of get off fossil fuels, stop the pipeline, can't have LNG or natural gas. Those people are telling us that there is a clean energy nirvana around the corner where some currently undescribable, unknown solution will replace all the things that we rely on today. And I think if you want to be practical and get down to the details and say, okay, well, what's the work we have to do? And you start looking at the fact set, you're also encountering things like I've just quoted the IEA on coal demand. So you got what some people want to see happen, and I'm not saying it's bad that they would want to see that happen. That we all want to have a cleaner planet, don't we? Against what's actually happening in practice. So I think until we are able to affect the enormous addition of coal-fired capacity in China and many, many, many other countries, nothing we do in Canada is going to make any difference. So, every move to sort of crimp and contain the usage by our 37 or 40 million people here of different kinds of fuels on a very incremental basis is not going to make any difference whatsoever. Now, I don't say that as saying by way of arguing that we shouldn't do anything. I wouldn't say that, but it's a matter of perspective. And let's focus our efforts where they're needed. Maybe we should be looking at how to make that coal-fired capacity cleaner, because it's there. It's going to be around for decades. They don't spend billions of dollars on these plants to use them for 5 years. They do it so they're there for 50 years. And so we're going to have this for a long time. So how can we develop maybe the carbon capture technology that will allow there to be the sequestration of the greenhouse gases that come out of these plants? I mean, I think that's something you could have a much greater difference on than just simply, okay, in Vancouver you're going to not be able to put a natural gas fireplace into your house. Really? Is that going to make a difference to the world? So that's where I'm thinking about this, Jim.
Well, when they say, let's use biomass, isn't that just throwing wood into a fireplace? Isn't that more polluting than natural gas?
Well, biomass, it's a question of where you're applying a solution. If you look at, say, the United Kingdom, where they've had a high reliance on coal for a long time, but a determination to get away from that and some great success in doing that, you've got an interesting recent deal. A company called Drax, which is based in northern England. They have the biggest electricity plant in the whole United Kingdom. They recently did a deal to acquire a Canadian company that makes wood pellets. That's biomass. And they're using the wood pellets. They're going to ship them from British Columbia and Alabama, where they bought Pinnacle Renewable Energy, and they're going to ship them over to northern England so they can put them into that great former coal-burning plant. For England, for the UK, that is success. Is it the perfect fuel? Well, you could have a debate about that, but it's certainly one that creates fewer greenhouse gas emissions. And for the United Kingdom trying to achieve their targets, it's a rational, desirable part of it. So it's kind of a question of, where are you applying that? If you're saying, let's use wood pellets in another place where maybe you have nuclear, you could say, well, why would we add the emissions from biomass when we have zero emissions nuclear? So, recently there was a federal political party that was debating this. Of course, it was from Quebec, a motion to stop the use of nuclear energy in Canada and stop the use of oil and gas in Canada. Of course, that's the kind of thing you hear from Quebec. They're kind of out of touch with things. They fancy that they have a lot of hydroelectricity and there's no environmental impact from that. But they drive SUVs just like everybody does in Canada. But the idea that you would try to legislate these things out of existence and have the same quality of life is just, complete fantasy, really. So, you have to look at the solutions that are available and try to fashion their applications so you can achieve the environmental impacts that you want to get at. And that just takes work, really.
Stewart, thank you so much for chatting with us.
Thanks, Jim.
My guest has been Stewart Muir, Executive Director of the ResourceWorks Society. His website, resourceworks.com. His Twitter handle, @SJMuir. If you have any questions for Stewart or any of our other guests, you can send them to info@howstreet.com. Our YouTube channel is Talk Digital Network. Find us on Twitter @HowStreet. We're also on Facebook. I'm Jim Goddard. Thank you for listening.
Comments made on HowStreet.com radio are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any matter whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. HowStreet.com radio is a production of HowStreet Media Incorporated.